Okay, thank you so much, Eric and Jasmine. We will circulate the URL of the restaurant, don't worry. We'll tweet it out and all that good stuff. Okay, so now we're coming to folks. I'm sorry to interrupt. Come on, people. Come on, people. Come on, people. Thank you. Okay. That's it. We now have our final plenary panel of the day. We're going to be reflecting back on the research that was launched this morning, connecting to many of the discussions we've had throughout the day. This session will help us to synthesize what we've heard while also looking ahead to what is coming in the field of genAI. And helping us to steer this discussion is Tamara Gilkes Borr. Tamara is the US policy correspondent at The Economist. She earned a PhD in education from Stanford and a bachelor's degree in journalism from the New York University. During her PhD, Tamara served as an education policy advisor for several organizations, including a presidential campaign. And she was also a middle school science teacher for 5 years in New York City public schools. Thank you for your service, Tamara. Please join me in welcoming Tamara and her wonderful panel right now.
And welcome to our panel, Shifting Paradigms, Where is genAI taking us? So all day we spent the day talking about online safety, and it only makes sense to now start talking about genAI, specifically the future of genAI. Before we dive into the panel, I am going to let you know that we will have time for Q&A. So while this is going on and this discussion is happening, make sure you're jotting down questions that you have so that we can be ready to go when Q&A comes around. So before we dive into the discussion, let's hear from our panelists. First, each panelist will briefly tell you who they are and a bit about their company if you don't know already.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sinead Bovell. I am a futurist and the founder of a tech education company called WAYE. And through this education, it's essentially how do we take concepts and advanced technologies and emerging technologies and make it a lot more accessible to wider markets and to markets who may have not sought out tech education. And then in my capacity as a futurist, I advise both private and public sector organizations on emerging technologies, governance structures, key risks and opportunities.
Hi, I'm Kunes, and I lead the Xbox Safety, Trust, and Responsibility team. And so we are focused on assuring that our Xbox community is safe and welcoming for all of our players. So this includes safety operations, it includes content moderation, parental controls, accessibility, and responsible AI, and privacy.
Hi, I'm Melissa Stroebel. I work with Thorn. We are a nonprofit that builds technology to combat online child sexual exploitation. I lead our research and insights team there, which is looking at understanding the existing landscape of online child sexual exploitation, as well as looking to the horizon to see what technologies may impact that field down the road.
Hello, my name is Fiona Thornton. I am a late addition, so you've probably seen in your paperwork that I'm stepping in today for Adam Hildreth, who unfortunately can't be here to make the panel. I'm the VP for our platform customers at CRISP's Kroll business. We are a real-time risk intelligence business where we help brands, assets, people against reputational risk, security threats, and online harms.
Excellent. So this is going to be super thoughtful, exciting, and informative panel. I'm super excited. Not to mention, it's like total girl power up here, so that's super exciting. So the first question, I'm going to go down the line, but don't worry, we won't go through in that way the entire time. It will be more dynamic. But for the first question, a quick warm-up. What do you all see as the most exciting potential of genAI?
I can start, sure. I think genAI largely is a conversation with data. And so anywhere where there is data, it's going to open up entirely new ways to analyze and grab those insights, and especially because it's also multimodal. So an example of where I think this could be transformative is we'll be able to ask questions such as, give me the last 1,000 trending videos on TikTok, the top 100 tweets, YouTube videos, Instagram posts, Instagram stories, and analyze what videos or content relates to an election point or a campaign or a candidate, where the first thread of misinformation maybe started, in what format, what was that demographic. So really being able to take a critical lens to data, multimodal data, in a way that we haven't been before. And you can take that example, apply it to education, apply it to healthcare, apply it to any sort of ecosystem. And to me, that's something that's really exciting.
I really love what you said, Sinead, about data, because for me, as we've looked at, things have evolved very quickly over this past year with generative AI and GPT. And one of the things that we're really excited about as we've been experimenting and doing proof of concepts in our gaming, under our gaming lens, we really see it as a paradigm shift in our ability to reason over data. So you can imagine that there's a lot of content moderation that is all about scale, and proactive moderation that allows us to find the rare, more toxic events in a sea of fun, generally speaking. And so the ability of generative AI to allow us to reason over that data much more effectively is enormous. And so the potential there is really exciting. We've talked a lot about today about fears and concerns about AI as well, but there's a huge opportunity for us in the safety space. And for me, that is really what I'm truly most excited about.
Yeah, and I would double down on that. I think from the safety space, there's a lot of exciting opportunity to be scaling and really drilling down. And I would add on to it the benefit that it's going to offer to the human beings who are really critical to the content moderation and trust and safety space. A lot of what we see when you are specifically looking at these harms, it's toxic, really harmful material, and those that are on the front lines of reviewing that and keeping our communities safe are exposed to it quite a bit. This technology offers an opportunity to potentially lighten that and complement it in a way that makes it much more feasible for us to be scaling those protection activities.
I completely agree. I mean, we've heard today from the research that there's lots of positive routes for genAI around efficiencies and creativity. But what we see, and you've touched on it there from the safety space, is there are also, it's around the intention of the user, right? So there are a lot of bad actors out there who will use genAI for nefarious purposes. Unfortunately, day to day, we see that in the job that we do, working with social platforms. At CRISP, we observe bad actors who are, using tutorials as spaces to actually teach other bad actor users of how to actually create content, such as, CSAM, using children who actually are not, who have not been abused. So there, it becomes a whole new risk space for trust and safety teams, and how they then look at these new victims who aren't traditionally kind of seen as victims, haven't been used as victims before. And so how law enforcement and wider communities deal with that is going to be quite an interesting thing.
Yeah, so we're hearing all these positive things about data and research and not having to expose humans to the toxic nature of all of this. But a lot of people are really worried about this technology. I know in education, every headline, it seemed like in the education space, was about how it was going to change education in a bad way. Everybody's going to start cheating, and all these horrible things are going to start happening. What are you most concerned about? And feel free to jump in. It doesn't have to go in order. So,
I would say I'm less concerned about AI. I think the biggest threat and risk we face right now is that we don't have the social or information ecosystem and capacity to incubate the change, the inevitable change and challenges that are in the pipeline, right? So if you look at how we dealt with COVID as a team, not very well. we are stepping into an age of exponential technologies. If we think generative AI has been a shock to the system, combine that with synthetic biology, moving into space, nanotechnologies, and we have a social fabric that's entirely broken, and our concept of truth has collapsed. And that makes change very, very challenging. If you look at the disruptions that are going to happen to the workforce with AI, we're not in a very healthy starting place. The foundation is quite cracked. And that's what I think alarms me even more than the technologies themselves.
I think for me, and I don't know if it's a huge area of concern, but I think it's an area that we need to focus on, is really how do we establish stronger and stronger partnerships between regulators, between policymakers, tech companies, parents, and educators, because at a time where technology is moving this fast, I mean, just last week we had announcements about GPT-4 Turbo that changes things in a big way for us as we think about it from a technology side. We've got to have those really strong partnerships and recognize that unless we're open and transparent with each other about what's working and not working and what we're seeing and not seeing, we won't make the necessary progress to assure that as we roll out this paradigm of change in technology, and as that supports, getting humans to their best possible states, we are protecting against those harms as well. And so I think that partnership is just so vitally important. And I hope that as things evolve quickly, we'll continue to evolve our ability to be open with each other and willing to be collaborative and learn from each other as things progress.
Yeah, and I think the human piece of it paired with that pace is something that I've really got my eye on, because the pace at which it is changing is speaking to all of the things that we need to be anticipating. But while we are catching up, all of this is still happening. We've already got harms that are being observed. As you mentioned, we are already seeing instances where bad actors are training models, they are producing imagery, they are scaling sextortion attempts. That is happening real time, and it's happening well in advance of us getting to a place of arriving at the realization that we maybe need to build more safely and a little bit more eyes open to not only the benefits, but also the potential misuses and abuses. And without the ability to effectively know what we are seeing versus what we are hearing, I've got a lot of worries about what that means for survivors and for victims that are targeted directly. We think about misinfo, we think about disinfo, we think about it through the lens of how we are consuming the truths around current events, around news around the world. We also need to think about what that represents for a human accounting, a personal accounting, such as a disclosure by a victim who says, I did not send that image. And yet as a parent, you're looking at an image that looks indiscernible from your child. How do you navigate that conversation when you can't recognize what you're seeing in the technology and your child is standing before you saying, I did not take that picture, I did not speak those words, I did not record that video. I think that's something that we are already there for, and we don't yet know how to navigate it.
I completely agree. I mean, what you're saying is all about education as well, right? So education is key, whether it be parents, and we heard that today, or it's from schools, government regulations, but also the platforms themselves. I mean, I was talking to a parent the other day who had downloaded genAI in order to understand how genAI works, in order to teach their 14-year-old daughter about the risks and raise the awareness there. But also working with the platforms that we do, you know, a lot of them are still understanding the different toolings that are out there to create genAI, whether it be text to image, text to audio, text to media, and having that knowledge and understanding how the different tools that are out there, whether stable diffusion, you know, how they're being used to manipulate content is still a learning process. Then look at their policies. Also, I was talking to a client last night, and you know, they are also building in-house tech to detect genAI. Now, it's still at their infancies, and so they're supplementing that with humans to help them support that. But I think it's taking all these steps to understand and try and mitigate the problems. But it's a learning process.
Wow, that was a lot. A lot going on there, and there's so much that I want to go back to. I think first I'm going to start with Kim. You mentioned regulators and partnerships. Many legislators have decided to step into regulating tech through age verification. What are your thoughts about the age verification process? Is this a good idea, or do we need something else?
You know, it's a great conversation that we've been having in the industry, and you know, in gaming in particular, it's been a conversation that's been going on for the last couple of years, especially. This was last year at this event, actually, we talked about it quite a bit. And this morning at the gaming panel, there was a conversation from Epic about the cabin accounts that they started, which is a great example of effort being made in the industry to de-incentivize children from lying about their age when they're going through an account setup process. I think we need to continue to work on the best possible ways that we can assure that children are giving us their correct age, that all people are giving us their correct age when they're setting up accounts, because that's one of the primary ways that we're able to actually provide for parental controls and protection is if we understand the age of the user. For us within Xbox, we've been working on a number of different proof of concepts because it is really important to us that as we roll out either age verification, age estimation, there's a number of different options here. What really is it, you know, what's best for our player? How do we anticipate, you know, some of the friction in those experiences as a global company, because identification is different from geo to geo? And how do we solve for that most effectively? And we want to go into this really with the perspective of our players and work closely with regulators on what are the right technology answers for those tough questions about verification versus estimation, et cetera. So I think it's something that, you know, we have continued to work with our industry partners in the gaming space. We want to expand across industry and enhance the partnerships that we've got to understand really what is the best possible way to do this across scenarios. But it is absolutely something that we need to continue to work on.
If I could add on to that, I think one of the things we've heard in particular, a lot of the research that we do at Thorn is working with minors directly and hearing from them about how they are navigating the internet, including things like age gating and things along those lines. And you're right, a lot of kids, they just skip right around it, whether it's because they want to get on a platform that's not permitted for them, whether it's because they are trying to establish relationships with people who are older than them. But it's been something that becomes important for us to think about as one of many layers of protection, sort of that old Swiss cheese idea of everything's got some holes, but if you put enough layers on, you start to create a better cheese coating, if you will. Lost that one there. But one of the things that I really love about this is if you're thinking specifically about environments designed for kids, then you're building with that in mind. You are proactively thinking about the possible risks, the possible opportunities, and really importantly, making sure that your platform meets them where they are to maximize their engagement with those protections, as well as you just delivering that. Sometimes, though, we are at risk of using age gating as more of a way to sidestep the responsibility of building safely. Because the reality is that if there is a gate up, kids are going to do everything to get around them. And there are some basic things that can be put in place to still be conscious of the fact that there may be minor users on a platform not designed for them. And how do you balance their safety? One of the things that we have worked closely with platforms on in recent years is understanding that if you focus too much on things like immediately deplatforming someone who's making a report and self-identifying, and you don't pair that with possibly help resources, that might have been the one moment that that child spoke up to raise their hand and say, I'm uncomfortable, I'm scared, I need help. And we might have missed a really critical opportunity to point them in the direction of a place where they can find support and resources, even if it is not in that place on that platform. So I think it's really important that we're thinking not only of it as a protection mechanism, but it can't be in isolation the sole gating practice to keeping kids safe.
And I'll just add, I think we need to be a lot more proactive, and the onus of proof needs to be on companies to prove that their technology is safe for kids and that it's been designed appropriately for different ages, versus let's wait and find out. I think we've seen the wait and see what happens model throughout social media and throughout this past decade. I don't think it's fared well for most of us, especially not kids. So I think we need to have proof of concept, proof of safety before something goes live to air. And this doesn't have to hold for somebody that's over 18. But when you have these young brains using these technologies and using these platforms, and even if they're intended for good use and they offer a lot of benefit and value, the reality is there's going to be some form of consequences for kids if we haven't thought about it from the get-go. So I think onus is on the company to prove it's safe for children first versus waiting and then discovering that it's not.
And when you say that they should be proactive, what does that look like? Is it research? Is it white papers? What is it?
Yeah, so I think the same research that has gone into understanding that notifications, for example, incentivize people to come back, or seeing a follower count, or seeing that you've been tagged in a photo. All of that research has been done with the goal of keeping people on a platform. So there are tools and information and research that can be done to keep people safe while they're on a platform, before they engage on that platform. We just have to do it. And it shouldn't also have to be just somebody has to kind of blow the whistle to figure out what is or isn't safe. I think we just need to be a lot more proactive.
Is it that easy? Do we just jump in and be proactive?
So I think I can share a little bit. So we wrestled with this in Xbox actually over a couple of years, deciding to move forward with the transparency report that we started releasing publicly about a year ago. And a big part of our decision to move forward with the transparency report was to be able to share with an audience of not just regulators, but our players as well, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, the results of it, and then enabling ourselves to get more broad feedback from folks to really adjust what we're doing, to learn from the things that we made mistakes on, to learn from the things that were going well. And I can tell you the last year leading this team since we started doing this, we've been getting some awesome feedback, and even just thinking through how we talk about all this stuff. This is difficult subjects to talk about publicly. How we talk about it, the data that we share, the way we think about sharing that data really had a profound effect on our learning as a team and getting better. And so when I look at the proactive approach, part of it is also the cycle of feedback and educating ourselves as we make mistakes, because we do make mistakes sometimes.
Yeah, and I know we have a lot of researchers here. We heard this morning some of the excellent research that FOSI is leading with young people as well. And we heard a small mention, but I think it's a really important one to call out, the care that comes with working with young people. And that is true whether it is 13 or older. When it comes to hearing from kids under the age of 13, there's even added layers of care that needs to take place from a safety and an ethics perspective. But we can't just not hear from them. We're building the technology for them. They are going to be the ones that take it through the next sprint. We can't just not hear from them. And the decision to not talk to them because it's hard is just as much of a decision as it is to decide to talk to them because it's necessary.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the proactivity. It's about engaging with young audiences to make sure that we understand what they're saying, what they're thinking, and how they're feeling. And I was at a panel earlier, or I was listening to a panel earlier on today, and one of the platforms was talking about how they're actually bringing in young people to help be advisors to their platform. But they also talked about how they have tools available for parents, for children to know how to navigate the online world and how to navigate their social platforms. But really, it feels like from a proactivity perspective, there could be more done to promote and raise awareness. They do a lot of marketing, but actually, why are we not marketing and raising awareness of these in-house capabilities and tools to help support families?
Yeah, I think we could keep going with this. If anybody has any thoughts, feel free to jump in, or we can move on. Okay, excellent. So one of the things that I think a lot of people are concerned about with genAI, particularly if you are a creator of content, like myself, we worry about our work being used or reproduced. Sinead, you had an interesting situation recently. Would you like to talk about what's going on with, yeah.
So I had a company create a chatbot, an AI-powered chatbot of me, without my consent, trained off of all of my data. And then excitedly, they let me know that they will soon be cloning my voice so people could call my chatbot, including me if I needed to call it. And that was quite alarming, especially because I even asked the AI-powered chatbot of me what they thought of kind of stealing somebody's digital likeness without their permission. And the answer they gave, I entirely agreed with. But I think, I was like, wow, that was quite profound. I'm going to use that for myself. But I think it speaks to the wider issue that if you have any form of a digital footprint, your data can be used in ways that you may or may not authorize. And I think what stood out to me the most, not just having this chatbot exist in the world and I had to send a cease and desist, but that it was the founder of the company who messaged me personally to tell me how excited he was that they created this chatbot of me without my consent. So it shows the ethics and the mindset behind what's being created and what's being launched. There's a massive gap. So I think we do need to start to have a lot more conversations about what is the etiquette and the guardrails and the kind of terms of use that we want to create in this new digital chapter, in this AI-powered chapter. Ironically, I used ChatGPT to create a cease and desist, and that worked. So we're kind of fighting AI with AI. But I think, it was quite alarming. It happened to a few other friends of mine with the same company. So yeah, that was, I guess, my unique AI experience, especially as somebody who talks a lot about AI ethics, and all of the data that was trained on were my AI ethics videos, which is very ironic.
I think what you said about intent and understanding is just so important, because we are in this place where the technology is evolving very, very quickly. And even those of us that are experts in the business, we are learning every day. And it means that we have to just be that much more dug into understanding this evolution together and working together on it. Because someone reaching out to you and telling you how excited they were about it, I mean, clearly is just not grasping the responsibility that they should have there. And so it's something we've got to keep talking about.
Yeah, and I think it connects to the wider question you had asked, as a journalist and somebody whose content's out there. There is a world in which somebody could create a chatbot of you based off of every book you've ever written, every lecture you've ever given. And for $10 a month, you could just pay this random company who's created a chatbot of it. So I think these conversations step into the wider world of intellectual property, of ownership, of data as the new labor. All of that kind of encompasses this same kind of topic.
Yeah, I think for where I sit, I see a narrower but even darker side of it, where we have kids who it's just their school photo. They don't necessarily have a large footprint. Maybe it's a family photo that was posted from a reunion. Maybe it's not taking much, and we have individuals, we have large organized groups at this point that are actively targeting entire communities and using benign images that they can scrape to then generate sexually abusive imagery of those individuals. That in turn can then be used to sextort. We're seeing pretty significant increases in financial sextortion. It can then be uploaded to sites, and unfortunately we're seeing this range not just from adults who are targeting other adults or adults targeting minors. We're seeing minors now using it as a tactic for targeting other minors as well. Many in the room may have heard about the case recently out of Spain, where dozens of young girls ranging from 11 to 17 had their images used, their likeness used to create sexually abusive imagery of them that was then circulated around the town. And the people who are responsible for having created that imagery was a small group of 11 to 14-year-old boys. There is a disconnect between the reality that this image is fake, that it doesn't also have real-world offline consequences and harms. And I think that's another tricky area that we need to figure out how to navigate, and we need to rebuff this idea that just because it isn't real or it isn't something that happened in real life, the abuse is real, the victimization is real, and we need to figure out how to navigate that piece as well as these likenesses are being misused.
I think more than ever, we have to be careful of protecting our data. We have a sister company at Kroll called our cyber security team. And not only are we having platforms step forward who are concerned about their data being vulnerable, but also content creators now are stepping forward asking for support around the vulnerabilities of their data. And I think, we know that in order to train these big AI models, they need that data. And so, abuse is happening there. So I think it's just more than ever we need to safeguard and protect both companies and individuals.
Yeah, so how do we get ahead of this? How do we ensure that the future creators of this content have this ethical mindset? And when we're talking about children, 11 years old, what do we do?
So I'm really passionate about this question in particular, because this is where school has to play and can play a really big role. We're asking the wrong questions about the moment we're in. It's not, will the student be able to cheat with AI or not? It's how do we prepare students for a future we can't yet see, but we know they're going to be dealing with massive challenges and kind of new different situations. So school, I think, represents a prime opportunity to meet students where they are and have these conversations about AI literacy, tech safety, because when we ban technologies in school, we're also banning an opportunity to learn these tools safely. So I think it has to start with education. We know that that's at least a direct route to kids. And conversations about tech ethics and digital literacy, should be a part of ed tech a lot earlier. So I think that the conversations, they should start in schools, as well with parents, but you can control a lot more what happens in the classroom. Everybody kind of has a different home situation. And we've seen this start to happen in Finland and in Estonia for different reasons and kind of insulating from different geopolitical challenges. But this needs to happen in educational institutions at scale across every country.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of different fronts where we've got opportunities. One is absolutely working with young people directly in their communities. I think schools are fantastic in part because oftentimes kids are getting access to devices sooner through classrooms than they are necessarily at home. And oftentimes the parents that we speak with view these conversations as something that doesn't need to happen until kids are 14, 15, 16. And then they're under the impression that, well, my kid already knows what they're doing, so it doesn't matter. So we see that disconnect there, but in school there's an opportunity to start the conversation in a really easily accessible way. It's not just about the scary things. It's about what are the things you do want to do? What are the experiences you do want to curate? What helps you believe something? What are the questions that you ask about a piece of information that you're consuming at any point in time? And that, I think, then starts the ball rolling sooner. But I would also say we see really spotty coverage in the types of curriculums that are delivered, the types of conversations that happen at home. But one thing is always true is that kids are going to go looking for the information that they're curious about, and they're going to talk to one another about it. So building out programs and having conversations about where this technology is going, knowing that we want to empower young people to navigate it and not necessarily requiring there to be a trickle down of knowledge about this technology and what it means for their futures and, quite frankly, for today for them. The other piece of it is working directly with the tech companies, because for many of the companies, in the risks that I look at most days, a lot of companies, it's never even crossed their mind the ways that the technologies they are designing and building because they're so excited about it are going to be misused in the ways that we know they will be. And so making sure that tech companies are very actively engaged with a diverse group of stakeholders to think about the different ways and to hear from them about those possible use cases is really critical to make sure that they are building wisely from the get-go. We're working with a handful of those companies now to develop safety by design practices to make sure that they are thinking about in the generative AI technology cycle, all the way from design through maintain, what are the really actionable steps that they can take to make sure that their products are as safe as can be for kids.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, the responsibility that tech companies have. I mean, companies like Microsoft, we spend a lot of energy on responsible AI, on digital safety, and that's because we have an obligation. It is the right thing to do, and it's also good for business. It's really important that as we build communities and drive people to those environments, that we are creating safe and welcoming communities. And so absolutely we have an obligation there, and absolutely it is something that we are deeply focused on, especially right now.
So we're getting close to Q&A, so think about your questions. But before we move to Q&A, I do want to talk about the recent results that were released this morning. I was surprised to see how optimistic families and teens are, parents and teens. When you hear the really important things we're talking about right now in this panel, it can feel scary. If you look just at what the media covers, I might be a bit guilty about that. It sounds like it's the end of days. But yet families are optimistic. Why do you think that is?
As a parent, I think sometimes I fake it. That's not what that all is. There's a lot of confidence there, but I also think that as a parent, we go in feeling, we can see it at the surface, and that gives us confidence in it. And then as we start to peel back the layers in conversations with our kids, all of a sudden we're like, oh, that's not what I thought it was, or that's not how I expected it to be used. And so I agree with some of the panelists this morning. I think we're at the early stages in a place where we feel more confident, possibly, and as we get further down the road, we might see that change. One of the first surveys that we did involving caregivers, it was a focus group, and we asked a question at the beginning of the focus group, and these were caregivers of kids who were 9 to 17, asking their confidence level on topics related to online child safety. And the overwhelming majority came back on a scale of 1 to 10, we are 7 or higher. We had a 45-minute long discussion, Q&A. By the time that we finished, and maybe some of this is because, it's at the end of 45 minutes, a lot of those parents all of a sudden went from being at a place of, I feel confident in how to navigate this, to being like, I've got a lot of homework to do. And it's not because they didn't know something to begin with, it's because they realize how much further they have to go to sufficiently safeguard their kids in those settings.
And I think they want to, right? And I think
They
that's
do.
what I took from the report this morning is just the desire to learn and to want to know more about
Absolutely.
genAI, to help to teach their children to keep them safe online, which is just, it was lovely to see. It's a interesting report, and I was quite surprised at how aligned they both were, but positive.
I mean, let's just start with the most surprising thing for me, that 50% of teenagers admitted that their parents might know something more than them about the subject. Like, shocking to me as a parent of 4 teenagers. But in all seriousness, I think that bodes well for an environment where parents are leaning into this technological evolution and recognizing the value of it and the risk of it, and being there and having that conversation with their kids right now. Like, that is such an important piece of this, and it's something that is an important part of all online safety when it comes to the relationship with the parent and the child. And so that part of it in particular, for me, bodes well for us to continue to be able to evolve together, parents and their children together, as we continue this journey of tech.
And I think it's kind of the first time where there's a massive leap in technological innovation, but all ears and eyes are tuned in to these conversations. I mean, from daytime talk shows to family dinner tables, people are having conversations about AI ethics or the pace of innovation. So I know sometimes it can feel heavy, and we're here trying to solve some of the wider problems. But this is also a really exciting time. And I think we learned a lot from what didn't go well this last decade. And so even though we see governments stepping in, executive orders, all sorts of change, I think it's really because everybody's leaning into this moment, and I think that that's a really good thing.
Okay, that might be a good place to end, unless anybody has anything to add. Okay, this might be a good time for Q&A. I see a few hands going up.
Hi, it's loud. So earlier in the day, it was discussed how kids and teens are starting to use AI as a form of like emotional support, and they're confiding in them. And I think Melissa, you'd mentioned taking opportunities to provide support when kids do disclose, especially because they're not often wanting to. So my question, maybe for the whole panel, is to what level of responsibility do AI companies have to document and then report disclosures of abuse or self-harm? Because I know right now, typically when you search on either social media platforms or on search engines, you just usually get like a hotline or some sort of like help center. But when there is disclosure, do platforms have a responsibility to take a step further and actually report it?
Do you want to speak to that one? I can speak to that one from my perspective. Let me say, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to interpret here, but I'll tell you, multiple services have a different definition based on that gives them a responsibility from a reporting, from a sort of content moderation wise. We do enforcement related to violations of policy. We have been in a process that allows players to appeal those things. In terms of disclosure of information to regulators, there's a fairly complex algorithm there that relates to the type of scenario that you're supporting, et cetera. So that may be a better question for a more detailed discussion on a specific regulatory requirement or a specific type of service. But absolutely, there are a number of different requirements that platforms have legally to report. And so, which is yes, I guess. There's a regulator around me that has more specific answers, but.
Anybody else?
No. Tough question.
Next question.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel. It's been really great listening along. Former middle school and high school teacher for 10 years, so this question's coming based on what we've just been discussing. We know that this country in particular has a huge teaching shortage right now that's not going the right direction. And so throughout this day, I've heard quite a bit of commentary on in school, in youth-facing organizations, but when we physically have fewer people on the ground in front of young people, I'm curious about what then becomes the company's role of building capacity for those partners that we know have more face time with young people in order to up-level some of the competencies, especially on AI that you all have spoken about.
What was the question? And do you mean do companies have an obligation to support educational institutions getting through these moments? Is that what you mean? I mean, I can't exactly speak. I do think private-public partnerships across all different facets of institutions, from setting policy to education to securing critical infrastructure, is really essential. In terms of what does that specific obligation look like, I'm not sure how you would kind of build a formality there. I do think that there is an opportunity, though, to lean into technology, and I don't love just throwing technology as the solution to everything. But in education, there is a unique use case and value add there to kind of lessen the load of teachers. I think we already put so much on their plate, so we shouldn't be adding to teachers, especially when we have a shortage. But there are ways we can lean into technology to make things a little bit easier there, a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more customized. But that's, again, going to require a rehaul of education as an institution. It hasn't been updated in a really long time, kind of around the same time that the Industrial Revolution was updated. So I think we do have a lot of work to do there, but I think we can take some off of teachers' plates so it isn't this burden. And we also don't really have a choice. If teacher shortages are going in kind of the wrong direction, we're going to have to, one, I think, compensate teachers more. I think that's just an obvious. But two, also look for places that we can lessen the load for them. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, I also think that there's, when it comes to the success of technological leaps, particularly, we think about this example, some of those who are going to be best positioned to help adoption in a good direction and in a positively disruptive fashion are going to be the people who know the technology the best. And so how exactly that ends up looking in terms of partnerships, technology, things along those lines, at the end of the day, those who are sitting at the front of building it are also going to be some of the best suited to help make sure that the waters are smooth as it's distributed through society, whether that's classrooms, homes, workforces, anything along those lines.
Thank you.
Hi. I was also surprised by the findings of this morning's report, and especially the point where people have a lot of trust in AI because it will help to take decisions, and also for people who feel left behind with all this information that we have in our society. But the thing is that this mental workload that we have is also coming from all this digital space and all these platforms and information, etc. Don't you think there is also a kind of syndrome of pyromaniac firefighter? I don't know if it's a good translation of the syndrome I'm talking about, like being the solution of the problem also that is caused? And do you think that is increased the responsibility then of the AI services?
So let me just paraphrase a bit to make sure that I understand. So it sounds like you're kind of asking about the role of companies to really help to, or I guess tech companies really, to help to sort of filter some of the information flying at users, enable a way to better summarize and better allow for people to understand the breadth of what they're observing, and that wasn't really captured or articulated in the results this morning. Am I understanding that the right way?
What I understand from this morning is people will say they will be overwhelmed by everything that is happening in the digital space, and that AI will kind of save us all, helping taking decisions. But is the problem more at the origins? And isn't that, I think, a solution that is not tackling the core of the problem? That's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, and just to make sure I'm kind of getting it, we live in an age of not necessarily accurate, but of information abundance, and our capacity to keep up with it. We just biologically can't do that. We're swimming upstream. And so a solution that companies or kind of tech enthusiasts would pose is that AI can maybe save you or help you filter through information and highlight what is actually important that you need to tune into. If that's kind of what you mean, I think there is some truth to, depending on what type of information it is you're looking at, maybe having a tool or a system that can kind of grasp at the key insights. But the broader conversation of this kind of information abundance and information chaos at the source, I do think is something that isn't very sustainable. We are swimming in information. It's just, you can't really keep up with it. So I do think, yeah, there is a bit of an issue at the source, and that's also kind of how platforms and social media has evolved to post as much as you can, as frequently as you can, and incentives that kind of power that. So can AI help in some ways? Perhaps, but yeah, I do think we need to question this chaotic information ecosystem that we're existing in, because it doesn't seem to be also working very well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, I see all the way in the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the education question and just ask, you had brought up specifically Finland and Estonia. What are they doing right in their schools?
Yeah, so they have a unique obligation to try to incubate and safeguard their information ecosystems. They deal a lot with disinformation threats. So starting in school, you start to learn to think critically about information you come across online. So why has an algorithm shown you this particular information in particular? Who are the sources of this piece of information, and what incentives do they have in sharing it? So it really just parts of their curriculum teach kids how to think critically about their digital ecosystems. And that's just kind of one small thing. They do an entire thing. Finland's also moving away from just subjects in silos and teaching more phenomena and things like problem solving. So multiple different ways to prepare for this next chapter of the digital age. But I think safeguarding information, thinking critically about algorithms, what you share, who's sharing things and why, is something that they do really well. And they've been doing this for years. So there is a format that we can look to, or a pilot program that we can look to. We just haven't seemed to do that yet.
This might be the last question.
No pressure. So today we saw the study, we talked about AI in the classroom, we're talking about genAI here, where it's taking us. Something that jumped out at me is kind of a underlying disagreement, not a negative one, but just I think between the role of human educators in the classroom and the value of human education, human-to-human education. And I'm curious kind of on all of your thoughts around that, especially when it comes to digital literacy education, how much we can rely or should rely on technology, on conversational or generative AI in general to educate young people around these topics, or if it's something we really need to focus in on human educators of any type, whether it's caregivers or in informal situations or formal learning. I'm just kind of curious where you think that's going and where we should be kind of all collectively placing our resources in that area.
High level, I don't think genAI should be teaching children. I think it should be a tool that supports teachers versus a tool that kind of replaces different areas of instruction. And there's also a lot that happens in a classroom outside of what's in a curriculum that teachers are very, very important for. So yeah, I don't think we just kind of dump this onto AI and think AI will save us. It's more how can we help teachers facilitate their curriculums in these kind of changing or more challenging environments.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that comment. And I think that the biggest thing is tools for teachers. How do we allow teachers to do more high-value tasks and take away some of the things that aren't as high value, that take away their precious time? And so can AI be used for those things? Absolutely. What are the best ways to help teachers learn there and grow in terms of what they spend their time and energy on? That is absolutely where we should focus time with educators.
And I can't speak so much to the specifics of teachers, but what I would say is we can't not have the technology be a part of their lives either. That like, we can't do digital isolation. That's just not a reality for them. And the human beings in their lives at every different point as protective circles for them are what is going to help them move into that place to use technology with autonomy, with responsibility, and in a way that helps them grow and thrive. So I think they absolutely have to be happening together.
Completely agree. I mean, I think what you've raised here today, all three of you, completely supplements in terms of AI plus humans to really help get the most out of from the education perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was an excellent final question. It's music to my ears. Definitely working with teachers, not trying to replace them. Thank you so much for this really thoughtful conversation. Can I please have a round of applause for our panelists?